really feel you're going back in time, to Iron Age or the early medieval period, and it's like nowhere else. Hello, I'm Mike King, and I was a museum curator for most of my career, and I've worked in museums in Scotland and Ireland, and I've always taken interest in the early medieval period, and I suppose also the transition from the Roman to the early medieval times. I'm particularly interested in artefacts, but also stone sculptures and churches. I suppose I'm interested in how Britain and Ireland are connected, and the whole development of culture of the early Middle Ages. I think in Ireland, for instance, some of the landscapes that you see there, are very similar, to what they were like originally. And it's because there's been so little development. And for instance, if you go to Dingle, you'll see a lot of monastic sites. You can still see their outline, and you can still see some of the buildings that are quite ancient. The Oratory of Gallarus, for instance, is it's a stone upside down boat, really, in a way. And it's still standing after 1200 years. An oratory for prayer. Sometimes you don't find, buildings that are preserved so well in other parts of Europe. You really feel you're going back in time to Iron Age or the early medieval period, and it's like nowhere else. The cliff scenery and the islands, offshore islands, are absolutely dramatic. There's the Blasket Islands and Skellig Michael, for instance. You can see them. You can even go to the Skellig. You can go to the Great Skellig by boat. And then you have there's a fantastic staircase up to the monastic site where the hermits lived in the early Middle Ages. So I feel it's the state of preservation and the wonderful historic environment you find yourself in. That's fantastic. And then when you think about the preservation, there were places, for instance, Egypt, where the dryness has preserved a lot of archaeology. For instance, papyri and other items, which have writing on. But the opposite is true of places like Vindolanda, where it's really been the waterlogged nature of the archaeology it's actually been even a better effect, because there are so many of these, for instance, these tablets, they call them, but these birch leaves, really thin leaves of birch, which have been written on the ink used as letters, attached together, folded over and sent, along the wall, or to traders, or to relatives, or families, or friends. Perhaps even records of the strength of a contingent in a fort, how many men were in the hospital and things like that. The preservation is actually unique. There's nowhere else in the Roman Empire, for instance, that so many records with writing have been preserved. So it's actually astonishing, and they're doing an amazing job at Vindolanda every year, excavating a different part of the site. And when you go there, you actually see excavations taking place. And I think that's the great thing about archaeology in Britain and Ireland, is a lot of it is community based. It involves the community in the dig, so volunteers can come along. So that's what I enjoy, is sometimes when on our tours we find digs going on, there are lots of people getting involved and excited by it, and that's particularly the case on Hadrian's Wall. At the moment that you're finding digs going on, you're getting up to the minute, updates from some of the expert guides on sites, telling you what's happening, and some of the excavators come over and tell you what's going on today. So I think that's what's exciting about it. There's good preservation, and there are new ways of studying what's being found, new exciting discoveries about dating. So it's not something that's dead, it's very much alive, and the tours I lead are really trying to bring all this archaeology alive.